back the bunny. It's great to have you here, man. We've talked a few times on Twitter. I can't remember how I first came across one of your posts, but I remember what got my attention was it was one of those days when I was just going through the timeline and every single post was about chasing APR and like how to get the top hottest airdrops. And I just saw you talking about maybe it was your post around DeFi and crypto as war as one of the first ones, and I thought this is refreshing because what I've mostly been interested in while working in the space is thinking how can we use crypto not just as a tool for having fun and speculating, which is great, right? Like I speculate, speculators are a part of any free functional market, but how can we use it also as a tool to help everyone achieve sovereignty and be able to kind of be in control of their own life and escape the sort of panopticon type umbrella that we're living in, especially in the West nowadays. So that being said, man, just tell me a little bit about yourself. What brought you into the space and what made you decide to stick around, especially during the bear market, right?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it was Generations of War. It might have been part one, maybe it was part two, but I remember you retweeted. No, it might have been the rebundling actually thread.
It was the rebundling. It was the
Yeah,
rebundling.
yeah, because you likened it to sovereign individual and fourth turning, which has like been very formative for me, formative for a lot of us in this space, right? That's not remarkable, but like that definitely I think influences me more than possibly others, and you can see that in kind of how I frame and approach stuff. But yeah, background I have a really broad background, frankly. I don't think you can pin it on one thing. I worked in TradFi for a bit. I was a risk analyst at a major brokerage for a while on like the hedge fund desk, and learn the in and outs of how margining worked and portfolio margin, and how accounts and stuff were structured. So that was like a good like um, getting the frameworks down of kind of how things work. And then I've done B2B startup tech sales for a bit as well, for like a couple different startups, fintech, and stuff like that. And then I've written for a couple different publications professionally, under my government name, and that's been finance and economic related, politically too. I've written for a couple political publications, fairly prominent ones. Uh, been syndicated in like what was one? MSN Money, Real Clear Politics, Washington Examiner, stuff like that. So I did that for a while, and then crypto just kind of started. I always kind of I've had actually coins for a bit. I actually was in Doge like 2 months after it came out. Like literally 2 months after it came out. I remember I accepted rent payments, not rent, utility payments in Doge at the time. Like this is November 2013 or something. Uh, because I just didn't see a difference. I didn't understand at the time, like, why is Bitcoin and Doge like these just tokens with different names? I don't care. This one seems funnier. This meme seems like it has Lindy power. Um, and then the scales kind of fell from my eyes in like 2020, because I wasn't a crypto detractor. I just thought they were tokens bouncing around. I didn't see like infrastructure. Then I saw like DeFi Summer and smart contracts and what Ethereum actually is building. And then it started to pique that curiosity of like, wait, okay, so this is actual infrastructure. You can look at this like a company. This is real. And that's what really got me like full on into that. And I used to be like all SaaS stocks and tech stocks. And now I honestly just don't even, I'll check those once a week. Like I just don't even care anymore. I'm like all crypto, as I've just learned more and more what this space is and kind of what it represents. And I kind of am in it for the tech. Like you could see all my explanations there are not like, well, I made a bunch of money and then I was like, this is great. Um, I've made cycles of money. I've lost a lot of money too. Anyway, and then yeah, I just kind of got more and more engrossed in it, and I love the culture. It's deeply meritocratic. No one cares who you are; they care what you have to say, and that's pretty antithetical to finance, which I initially thought I liked, and now like as a environment, I don't. Very pedigree oriented and just so yeah, crypto culturally, I is my home, like my people, and yeah, it's just been a great avenue to like learn and do what I like to do organically. And so I stuck around because hey, I can't imagine doing anything else right now. I really can't. Nothing else interests me on this level, even remotely. So
I mean, it sounds like you've done a little bit of everything. Where we do have overlap is on the SaaS sale, enterprise software sales side, and I think a lot of people in crypto actually come from that field. So we went from being tech bros to crypto bros. So I guess that's pretty great. But I am interested in the I kind of reasoned that you had some sort of background in finance because you understand a lot of very complex topics that honestly are way beyond my head. And the explanations you give in the breakdowns have helped me wrap my head around some of them. But clearly, you were a professional in the field before. What is interesting to me though is that what drew you into crypto was more on the sort of business and finance side more than the ideological side. Given a lot of the threads and the blog posts that you've written. So let's go to that first before we come to crypto as a business. And look a lot of the different things you talked about, including like decentralization metrics and censorship resistance. Let's just look at this from like a very much like how does crypto change the way that we associate and get to know and work with each other? How does it change the paradigm of what we know? And maybe we can tie that to the sovereign individual, as you mentioned. It's been a formative read for a lot of people in the space, but maybe not everyone's familiar with it. So I'm curious if there's some sort of link there for you that you could point to more tangibly.
Like in terms of like what I think it does like tangibly for infrastructure and like people's lives, and then how the
I suppose to rephrase that, you mentioned that you originally came into the space more from the business and finance kind of angle, looking at it as like, how can I apply this in a way that's more efficient. But I'm curious before we go down that road, what point in time you became interested in what crypto could do kind of like from a more ideological perspective in terms of it helping us reorganize societies in different ways.
Yeah. As I started to like the business, when I learned that, when I started to view it as infrastructure, that piqued me from the standpoint of, okay, there's actual value. This is real. Like, this is not just games. Again, and I have nothing against them just being viewed as cryptocurrency. I actually fucking hate the term cryptocurrency. I think it's a stupid misnomer that paints, Doge or XRP or Bitcoin the same as ETH or Phantom. This is not the same thing, and Phantom does not want to be a currency, and neither does ETH. Like, it has just because it has monetary value does not make it a currency. But as I started to see that that structure, then I started to understand like how that structure worked. And when I started to learn how that structure worked, it deeply aligned with things I felt that were parasitic or should be disintermediated or were problematic. I don't like that word, I guess, but it probably worked. For how things function in general. Like calling banks and brokers, I don't want to use like the term rent sinking. I think is too harsh because they do provide value. Like, they're an intermediary for transacting and engaging in the economic world. Like, they're not just parasites. Like, they provide real services. But now that this infrastructure is proliferating that allows you to basically, I love Vitalik's. I'm not going to claim this as my own Vitalik's analogy that, the way globalism outsourced workers to China and disintermediate the middle class, blockchains disintermediate corporations. Uber is now outsourced because Uber only exists because if I want to hail a ride, I need to get in touch with you. You're a driver. I have no way of communicating directly with you. Uber is simply an intermediary that gets me to you, and they take a cut of that. They're a middleman, which is fine. Middlemen provide real fees. That's a real service. But when I started to see that, like, okay, now Uber's gone. Now Bank of America, these middle ones. I mean, banks still will exist, obviously, but you're removing people from the chain of the supply chain, so to speak. And every time you remove one person, that's less of a cut for them and more value you retain. And I mean, that just aligned with me in all kinds of ways. I'm like, all right, there's a lot of things powerful here. And I politically kind of fall, naturally on the dissident, you could say dissident right. And I see what also it disintermediates and removes the power control over. And that was a bit of a process for me. And that's just me. That's what takes me from like, oh, I'm curious from a tech and business standpoint to, okay, no, I'm ideologically aligned with this too. Like, my support of this transcends making money. Like, it's in the boundary of like, this removes entities that have become and are becoming increasingly toxic and are now exposing themselves as they don't just exist because we didn't have the infrastructure. Now they want to exist because they want control. and because this infrastructure disintermediates them, and they're obviously upset about that. And I like how it upsets the people that you would want to upset, and that aligns, like, the sovereign individual is just written for that, in terms of how it describes and basically predicts, that as you remove these frameworks for how you're allowed to do things, the power starts to come back to the individual, and you get to go where you're treated best, is kind of the mindset. Like, you almost viewing nations like you would a company, or as a customer to a company, which I don't entirely like from like a spiritual standpoint. I think nations are more than companies. Like, they should be, like, I think, orienting things around a culture and ethos and people. So I don't quite fully agree with that analogy, because I think that's part of what cheapens things. But at the same token, though, like, the U.S. needs to, is getting away with a lot, because it's the U.S. Like, we just call the shots because we own all the infrastructure. We can do what we want, and this takes that away, piecemeal. And anyway, that I don't want to get too windy, but that's kind of like the interpretation of it overall that feeds into the things I've read and kind of followed that cultivated my viewpoint towards stuff. It aligned really well with that, and then I see it as both a fantastic financial tool and a political tool. I don't like it as that, but it is inherently. I mean, it is inherently political. If you're just pretending it's not, otherwise, even if you don't view it like that, because it disintermediates very powerful things that are inherently political. So it also comports well with my views on that.
Yeah, I mean, it being inherently political is one of the things that I can't believe some people still try to say it's not, right? Like, it very clearly is, if it disrupts the patterns of what we're used to, the way that power structures are arranged. And like you said, disintermediates a lot of people who don't want to be disintermediated. One of the questions I wanted to ask you was, with this whole, for anybody who's read A Sovereign Individual, and then others who built on it, like Balaji Srinivasan's network state, what do you think about this idea of, you said, a nation's more than a company, it's a shared culture, it's a shared people, it's a shared ethos. I believe that's what you said, right? Can that be something that's, as Balaji has suggested, a network, in the sense that maybe you and I have similar values, we live in different places, we're of different races, but we speak the same language, for example, and we align around around a lot of the same things. Do we have to be in geographical proximity for that to be a nation, or can that be a nation of people that are distributed and it's more like a network?
That's tough. And I'm actually in Generations of Crypto and War Part 3. That's actually a core one I'm touching on. And this is a part where I think Balaji, I like his work on that. I borrow from that. I don't borrow from that. I just come to the same conclusion. I'm like, and I know Network State says this too. So I'm aligned with that. I actually haven't read the Network State. I just know Balaji's overarching message. And I by and large, like, love him. Super based, really smart. But where we differ a bit, where I'm going to touch on that in, like, the Part 3, I think that's a bit aligned with sort of the code is law mindset, in that it pretends we don't occupy physical space. Like, we are not digital entities yet. Like, I'm a piece of meat that has to be in a spot. The spot I'm in has laws. And until we build a mafia that can compete with that mafia wins, right? And it gets to make the rules. And so you have to still kind of align with things like that. That's my take. That's my kind of a code is law comment. It's not law. Like, even if it exists purely digitally, like, there are hierarchies of law. In your physical body law, because they can put you in a box, is unfortunately the higher value law, because, I'm sorry, violence can be brought on you on that domain, and so that's what matters. So on the network state point, I don't think you can discern like that. But also, again, to me, kind of has this mindset of, like, we're not pieces of atoms, we're pieces of bits, and we're not, like, we like to exist in the bits world, and I certainly like to exist almost solely in the bits world. I go to the gym every day and lift. That's my atom involvement daily. But beyond that, I'm, like, all online. So, like, and along with that, like, atoms based proximity thing, we need networks and supply chains for food. Like, we need housing. We need the Maslow hierarchy, basic stuff for us to do well. And that takes coordination. And that means we need to be in places that, by and large, have the same ethos as we do, and the same beliefs and the same constitution, whatever you want to describe it as. All the Constitution does is codify, hopefully, a collective belief of a people. And so if you want to feed yourself and house yourself and not get put in a box, you need to be in physical proximity with a mafia hopefully made of you and your kin who also don't want to put you in a box. So you have to be in a spot that is aligned that way. Like you can't get around that. So the national, the geographical thing to me, I again, I haven't read the sovereign or the network state, so I don't know if he actually says like you can just be wherever. You can't. You can't just be wherever. Like you need to be somewhat in the same geographical space, and it's just like I'm sorry, like until you find a way to exist purely in the metaverse, your body and your physical where you are takes the highest priority because again, people can attack you. So that'd be my pushback on that. I do think networks exist in other ways, and we can exist in some like, in the financial sphere or some sort of services-based sphere. Yeah, the geography probably doesn't matter, but in terms of like real community state, like we're living freely and able to do this, and I can exist with impunity or without fear of repercussion. Like the physical territory you occupy does matter. So anyway, I hope I don't know if that addresses it.
It does. I mean, tying that to your series of generations of war in relation to crypto, which I'll drop in the comments or links or wherever this comes out so everybody can read. How do you tie into that? How do you tie that into what the future might look like? Do you see people migrating to certain locations, right, where it's other people with kind of like-minded beliefs and legislation that's passed maybe at the local state level that supports that? Or do you see this kind of, as you've stated in the generations of war, as being more of a guerrilla mindset where people stay positioned wherever they are and then they seek out their freedom through means that are outside of just the traditional kind of like, well, first you got to lobby to this person, and then you got to go to that person who's going to talk to Bob, and Bob will talk to Joe, and then hopefully one day you'll be free, right? Like, how do you see those two things coexisting, or not?
So I'm sorry. Tell me the initial part of your question.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a convoluted question. Essentially, what I'm asking is, right, if these network states may not necessarily. Yeah.
Well, are we going to aggregate physical spots? I lost my train of thought. Yeah. Okay. So I remember your question now. So yes, and I actually think eventually that will cause like this exodus will occur. Like you can already see a spike in increases on Google search. Like, how do I revoke my U.S. citizenship? I put that in. I think I put that as a prediction in part 2. I hope I did. No, I put it in part 3. That's a part 3 prediction. That as part of like, when you see the migration, when you see this eventual leaning, when people realize what I'm saying here, like the physical space you occupy is going to matter, and the places who are going to be most receptive to that are all the ones from a power and from a viewing power as a zero-sum game have the most to gain from the disintermediation of the West, you could say, or the reduction of power from the West. So who is that? El Salvador is a great example. Like they're rather poor, they're not much of anything, and it seems they're taking themselves really seriously now. Like in terms of what they've done to like, we need to fix this crime problem. Like, listen, it just we need to do what we need to do. And in a way, and it's funny, like apparently Europe, like way, way, way back when, kind of almost did the same thing. And the reason they're less violent is they just frankly killed all the violent people. Like they killed like 1% of their male population, I think, like in the 1400s or some parts of Europe, which were the inherently violent people. And now, you kind of like Darwinianly just actually improved your stock. El Salvador kind of is doing that. They're not killing them, but they're just suspending the Constitution and incarcerating them. They're doing the things to make themselves more appealing to this kind of environment. They're going out of their way to signal that. A lot of other places will probably start doing that. Singapore, maybe. I honestly think Singapore is probably too rich to start to stoop or to like try to really appeal. I think it's going to be places that like have a lot to gain because they don't have much to lose. I don't like Estonia, like Baltic states like that. South America in general is probably a pretty solid example. El Salvador, particularly. Maybe Turkey. I'm not sure. Just places that are not necessarily ideologically aligned with the West or the U.S. are tired of their shit and see this as a way to kind of steal that intellectual capital and gain some power on their own by removing the power of like the SWIFT network and the dollar and all that, because the U.S. can sanction you and basically destroy you, as it's done with Iran for a very long time, as it's trying to do with Russia. And countries see that. They obviously want to remove that, and they're going to try and get around that. And I think crypto represents that for a lot of them. So Yeah, they'll structure themselves to be appealing to us. I think that migration will happen because I don't think the U.S. will change course. I don't think it can help itself. It's not gonna. I don't think it has it in itself, and by that I mean the leadership, obviously, to like understand that this is happening either way. Get out in front of this and be more appealing, and understand you're going to lose some of your control structurally. It's happening. Try to retain as much as that as you can, and you don't need to be belligerent. I just don't think they can. Like nothing you're seeing is speaking to that. Nothing. Like I'm pretty black pilled in these theories and threads. It's because I fundamentally don't. I see the people who run this, who are in the highest, places of position in these roles. I don't think they think this way. I don't think they're capable of thinking this way. I don't think they think in long-term cycles like fourth turning thinking. I think they think in terms of quarter to quarter, month to month. What do our constituents like, and what gets us the most lobbying dollars? And just extremely myopic. They're the quarterly reporting of political thinking. And China is the yearly reporting of political thinking. And these longer term, they understand like thinking longer than one cycle. And maybe politically that's because they don't have to worry about getting elected every month or every however many years. But yeah, the US is just fundamentally too myopic, I think, to get in front of this. And I think people who like say, well, the US has always figured it out. They've, they'll get it together at the United States. I'm like, the United States is not very fucking old. This is a young country. Like, this is not some kind of like, let's point to history and the US always does right. Like, no, like this was found like 250 years ago. That's not, get out of here. Like, you're not pointing to an empire that has existed for like beyond cycles or things that like transcend sort of historical patterns. You're like, oh no, the culture is different. I don't see that. This country's not that old. It has not been a superpower, like a very prominent power, for very long at all. What, like, we'll say the 1900s, like, is when it became like the number one economy, I think, early 1900s. And so it lucked out by winning the most important war of modern times. It got a massive amount of power from that, and has a constitution that's pretty good, that operates on like a bulwark of decentralization that it's increasingly trying to abandon. And it will, because all a constitution is words on paper. Like, the people have to believe in it. And I don't think the people here necessarily believe in it that much anymore, or they don't care enough to defend it. So anyway, yeah, I don't think the US has this magical sticking power that we can point to historically, because we just don't have that. And it seems to be following the same kind of pattern that you see in a lot of cycles and empires when they start to die or decline. Like, a lot of them, like, it's weird how much the transgenderism actually like comes up as a theme for this. Like, that's something that surprised me even for like ancient times. But like, the money debasement, the just things where you're abandoning kind of the things that made you strong. It's just obvious that that's happening, and it's happening kind of about in line with the 250-ish year cycle of empires, which is like a very soft heuristic. It doesn't have to necessarily follow to that, but it just looks like it is. And I don't think there's anything particularly special or unique about this place. There was at its onset, but it's kind of abandoning that. So I don't think it'll be able to maintain that role. And yeah, I think a lot of these small countries that are really understanding, like, hey, this is our time to shine, they're going to shine. And hey, like, I want to go where I can exist freely with people with like mind type thinking, where I don't have to be afraid of being put in a box. And yeah, I just think that's going to proliferate. I think that mindset's going to become more and more normal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer in the market being the ultimate decision maker, and I'm rooting for El Salvador's experiment to succeed, because not only will it attract a lot of Westerners who I think are looking for opportunity and are tired of getting squeezed, but it would also set a great example for a lot of Latin American countries that are going down a dark path and repeating history once more. But that being said, I'm of the same mindset of go where you're treated best. Like, I don't really have a firm allegiance to any particular nation state, and I don't really view the world through that lens, for better or for worse. I grew up moving around a lot, and I've been exposed to a lot of different cultures, so that might inform it to a certain extent. But let's talk about for Americans who want, like, whether it's the America that they think it is or not, as you said, Americans who want to stay and they want to, promote and protect freedom, and they want to uphold a lot of the things that they find sacred and valuable in the Constitution, which I think a lot of us do. That's what made America a great country at one point in time, if it can't be again. What would you say to those people in like a hypothetical scenario? Of course, everything here is hypothetical. What would a resistance look like from within, led by those who choose not to migrate and who choose to stay and plant their roots here, right? And this ties back, of course, to generations of war and your analogy of the Vietnamese farmer.
Yeah. The Vietnamese farmer metaphor has to be writ large though over like the world. Like that's what makes it like so ridiculously undefeatable. Like we couldn't even defeat in a small geographic locale of farmers where we knew where they were. Like we lost that war. It was war of attrition. They were guerrillas, and I love the Kissinger line. Like you don't have to win, you just have to not lose. You exhaust a larger foe, it embarrasses them. They're expected to win, and if you do that enough, they lose their will. They did it with the Taliban. Did it too. Like because you don't care enough. Like there's a very different mindset from someone who's fighting to win and someone who's fighting to just like I'm not sure, fighting like for just like we like to have more of a say or a sphere of influence. Like Vietnam farmers are fighting to win. Like that was their home, right? Taliban, like Afghanis fighting to win. And you just exhaust a larger foe eventually that way. So that's what that means there. It's like, listen, when this proliferates enough, and I mean, it's all across the world, and it's just going to get more so where we're all using and interacting on chain. Like we are legion. Like we're not even one geographical spot. Like you can't. What are you going to do to get out in front of that? Like the resources and just ability are just not there. Like they weren't apparently even there to take down a small Asian country in war. And now you have a bunch of technologically sophisticated people with cryptography and like anonymizing sources and building this network, and you're going to stop that? Like you're just not going to stop that. You're not. Like if you wanted to actually legitimately try to, you'd have to do things so draconian and obscenely like holy shit, this is war actions, that it's not feasible. Like you can't do that. Like you have to like turn off the internet in certain areas or like gatekeep like buying computers. Like it's just you'd have to take that degree of action if you're serious about stopping that. If you're serious, that's what you do. Otherwise you just like fighting this obnoxiously uncomfortable war of low intensity warfare where you make laws and you catch some people, but you don't really stop anything because you can't stop anything because it's too much. So anyway, that's like the Vietnam farmer analogy, and why I think and why I want us to take on that role more. I think it's really just like empowering, funny, kind of mimetic framing. When I'm allowed to change my name on Back to Bunny, I'm going to put the Vietnam Warfare thing. They'll let you change the blue check. I hate that about Twitter Blue. I can't change names quickly. Anyway,
go ahead.
Yeah. I tweaked my name within the last like week and a half, and I still can't change it now. Anyway, I'm going to put that up there, and I really want that to become more of like a mindset for us. But for people who want to like you want to stay in the U.S. because they're like, oh, hey, no, like you take the opposite side of my statement. I think the U.S. is special, and I want to defend it and see it return to glory. I mean, the way it's governed, I mean, it's good. Like the founders understood that like the best way to make something good is to neuter the shitty people who will end up running it. And that's what our government is like. That's what the three separate, divisions or structures of government, divisions of power do. There's like never cohesion there. That's by design. The gridlock is baked in because it's very, very fucking hard to change things that way. And that's why we're a republic with rights that you can't vote away. Like the founders did not like democracy. Like we're not democracy supporters or likers. That's why we're built in a way to make changing structural things like hard. You can vote for people to represent you, and that's fun and cool. But like there's these bulwarking here, and you don't mess with that. So, I mean, one, you got to hope that not gets messed with. Them talking about doing things like expanding, packing the Supreme Court and putting more seats in there. That would be a really bad sign if they actually did that. Like they talked about it enough to where it really was like a consideration, it seemed, but ultimately not. But they only didn't do it because it wasn't palatable. Like that's it. Remember, they want to do that. They 100% are willing to do that, especially the left would love to do it. The right would too, though. Like the Democrat Republic binary is not much of a binary. It's like the same politics. One has lower taxes. It's close to the same. Like in terms of like the shit that matters, like culture war stuff, fine, but that's a sideshow. That's just to distract you. If you want to stay here and I guess advocate, like Ryan Selkis, 2-bit idiot that's his handle, 2-bit idiot, on Twitter, Nick Carter, who I like, obviously I love what they're fighting for. I just think it's futile. But like, you can start by doing, seeing the stuff they're tracking, you're trying to get lobbying groups together. Money does talk, and it does matter. Crypto is well capitalized. They're pushing on shining light on certain bills and things that are obviously draconian and trying to attack us piecemeal, like, that language of making VPNs for apps like punishable with a $500,000 fine and like 3 years in jail or whatever that was. Like, I wrote about that. Like, I think, on Gen of War Part 2, like, they're going to target VPNs. Like, they're just starting to fucking target VPNs, so you have to really not let that happen. And you need money and other people to support and back you. So you need to build coalitions and PACs and stuff like that, and fight against Elizabeth Warren types who are obviously just complete sock puppets for banks. It's not going to be a left or right thing. It's going to be who are the bank sock puppets and who are the ones who seem to have actually some kind of belief in the U.S. in the U.S. ethos. Thomas Massey seems to be that congressman who always is in the crypto side for just everything from a philosophical standpoint. Ron Paul, if he was still in office, would be that. His son Rand seems to be that. There are very, very few like that, though. I honestly can't think of anyone else like that. Like, guys who like philosophically are like, who are spiritually united, like Americans. Those guys are spiritually Americans. Like, Jeb Bush, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, even Trump to some degree. Even Trump, like, I don't feel like they're spiritually Americans. Like, they don't actually follow the tenets of, like, listen, we exist to just implement laws and not fuck things up, because when we do, we fuck things up. So hands off. We are referees at a basketball game. And that's all we do. No one wants to watch the referee. No one gives a shit about the ref. But at the same time, a ref needs to be there to make sure laws are followed and there's rules. Otherwise, then your basketball game just descends into chaos. So, like, refs are necessary, not like no government. But no one views themselves as a referee. Like, no one wants to be that. Everyone's there. The nature of political office is the nature of a power-hungry person. It's like these roles self-select for shitty personality traits. There's a reason why the trope of, like, violent, egotistical police officer exists. Because obviously not all cops are that. I'm not calling cops that, but the role of cop does attract the kind of person who would be that, right? And so that's a breeding ground for that kind of, or that's a place where that kind of person has a home. Same thing with attorneys and, mendacious word games and those kind of people. Obviously not all attorneys are that, but that kind of, maybe sociopathic personality, manipulative personality trait is drawn to being an attorney. Also, some attorneys love law and want to reinforce it. Again, please don't, like, not smearing a whole class of people is one thing. But, political office inherently does attract someone who wants to control things. And I think at the highest positions, it disproportionately attracts for that. Because you got to really want to control things and, like, super, super try to get these roles. And they normally don't pay that much, like $175K a year to be a congressman or something. So what are you after then? Like, don't tell me you're after, I want to make it, I want to make a difference and change. You fucking not. Like, you want what it's obvious that you want. You want to control things. And, like, just that's becoming more and more and more prevalent, I think, in those who seek political office. And anyway, I'm sorry, I think I lost my train of thought a bit. Anyway, that's where I'm like, you need to elect more people. This is where I was going with this, who are spiritually American and are not clearly someone trying to build a brand or have a power grab, and I don't know how you do that. Like, that's a very far-fetched thing to say, I know, but, like, elect more people like Thomas Massey, Rand Paul, and hope that they catch on, and, like, things like the Tea Party kind of become more a thing that also adapt crypto as their mainstay, and, like, hey, anyway, I'm sorry, it's a long answer, but that's where I would kind of maybe start, and grassroots lobbying and building a coalition and going from there, and hoping people at highest orders of government are spiritually American and come along with you. But
I mean, I'd argue that the biggest impact some of the people you named have made is not even in the lobbying itself, but making people aware of how absurd some of these things are and how unconstitutional they are. Like, Operation 2.0 and the Restrict Act, and other things that the majority of Americans wouldn't really care for or even know about unless it was brought to their attention, because it's always in the fine print, right? And it's always done under the fog of war, and it's always kind of slipped in the last minute. So while I think it's admirable, I do align, I think, a little more with again, going back to your generations of war analogy, which I just can't get away from because I think it's so brilliant in the sense that yeah, we could all be Vietnamese farmers spread across the globe. Goes back to the sovereign individual thesis of the microprocessor becoming available to every person, so every person can now own their own computer and be in control of their digital sovereignty and connect with others across the globe to sort of create these new revolutionary power structures. But even at the level of how does an organism react when it's prodded? I oftentimes see some reactions that I don't think are entirely aligned with reality. For example, and tell me if you disagree, but oh, they're going to go after the on ramps. They're going to go after the off ramps, which I believe they will. I think it's just a matter of time until all of them are taken down one by one accordingly. But what people don't realize, in my opinion, at least, like I'm saying, is that there will always be a gray and a black market for things that have utility and necessity. And even if you look at places in Latin America like Venezuela and Argentina, where, for example, there are severe restrictions on holding foreign currencies like the US dollar, there's a huge black market for the US dollar where it trades at a premium. Cuba as well, of course, right? And none of these sort of top-down impositions stop people from doing things that have legal consequences and ramifications. Why? Because they know that it's the only way to survive. It's take the risk or don't survive, right? And so I see a similar thing taking place where, I mean, you see it every day. The banks can't deal with all of the things that are being imposed upon them, so they're closing down people's bank accounts to stay compliant, which means that anybody who's touched anything, it doesn't matter what or how or why or what side of the political spectrum you're on, all of a sudden wake up and their bank account has been closed, and then behind the scenes, they can't open up any other bank accounts either because all the banks communicate with each other. And as people see this and they realize it, and maybe they don't even really care about crypto from like a first principles ideological perspective, but maybe they know, hey, there's this thing that's very difficult to confiscate, if not impossible. It's censorship resistant. I can send it in a fraction of a second, and I can take it with me wherever I go. They'll start to resort to this, even if it's against the rules, so to speak. Why? Because the alternative is to live under the system of it's an untenable system to live in, right? Where it's constant surveillance. You can be shut off at the click of a button for expressing an opinion that maybe shows some sort of dissent. And so I see that being the reaction to all these sorts of things, alongside the technology evolving, right, to withstand the attacks that might come from without. It's also more and more people becoming aware of it as a method of survival in first world countries like the US today, where 10 years ago, maybe it wasn't necessary for the majority of people, but now more and more people are going to be exposed to it. And I don't know if that's hopeful thinking, but I do think that the reaction to harsher and harsher restrictions is just going to increase the demand for it in many ways that we might not anticipate.
Yeah, I don't, I those are good analogies to draw from. Like, I would say a bit of the difference there is that, it depends on how badly the government wants to enforce it. Like, listen, like weed is technically illegal at the federal level. Mushrooms are illegal at the federal level. Like, have you ever seen a big psilocybin crackdown? Like, some things are like illegal, but we really don't give a shit, right? Just like, but we can't say it's legal because then Walmart could sell it, and we don't want that. So we don't want it to be so, like, we can't allow it to be like openly legal, but we really don't care. So if you know a guy, just do it. Don't tell anybody. Right. So like, there's like, don't give a shit boundary. And then there's like, we give a shit boundary. Like fentanyl, we fucking care about that. We're cracking down like under, like, deservedly so. And we're busting people and throwing the book at them. And then some, if you do that. I think the US will view us like fentanyl. And I know that sounds dramatic, but and like, for what it represents, again, the United States has by far the most to lose. Like, it's not even close in terms of like the reserve currency and the control, which the reserve currency is like not even kind of on that a good thing for its citizens. It's a good thing. Lynn Alden has some great takes on this. I actually really like her on her takes for on who the reserve currency benefits. Like, it benefits like the US machine and like the war machine and the power reach, and we can flex on you and put our import democracy into your place, but it doesn't help the middle class. Like, having a strong, very strong local currency is not a good thing for your exports, among other stuff. So again, we're not going to go silent into the night on that. Like the U.S. is not going to. I just don't see this group of people led by individuals like Kamala Harris and I mean even for Trump's department, like who is his Treasury Secretary? Mnuchin. Like they weren't friendly to that. They were every bit as shitty. Like Mnuchin might as well have been like Elizabeth Warren on that, just less flamboyant and without pronouns. That's where I'm like, that's the distinction here. Like these are not people that see things from a game theoretic. How do we make how do we help our nation be as strong as possible considering what's coming? They're going to see this is a threat. We lose this power. Crack the fuck down. And again, like just because of who's running it, I don't see how there's any other way to that. If you can point to some and behavior that seems to not be that so far, that would be a great example. I mean, I just don't like the U.S. seems to like be physically incapable of that. So yeah, there'll be a black market for it locally, like well, as there will for anything, right? But I mean, like, do you think that I just don't think that's going to be appealing for people who want to exist in this space to always exist, understanding they're in a gray/black market and look behind your back and make sure your kill switch is on for your VPN, because if not, you're going to get a knock on your door, right? So, like, yeah, it'll definitely exist here. Some people will not abandon it, and some places, some guys will create a homestead in rural Maine and exist off the map for a bit and do it. But they're gonna you're gonna have to either exist over always looking behind your shoulder, or I mean confront head on. And I just don't. I just don't think that's going to be tenable long term. And I don't think the U.S. ever sees the light and understands. Okay, listen, this paradigm is changing. We need to change along with it. We've always adapted to new tech and new whatever because listen, when Silicon Valley became a thing and we made the computer, that benefited the US directly. Like that was a massive accretive thing for businesses, companies, productivity, people, and the United States, right? So obviously we were favorable to that. Like no shit, we were supportive of that. Crypto is not that for the United States. Like crypto is a piecemeal viewing power as a zero-sum game, which it is. Like it is power is a zero-sum game. Like economics and finance does not have to be, but it takes from that. Like the U.S. is losing control from that. I don't see how something that operates on like a power reduction paradigm is ever something viewed favorably by the place that has the most to lose. And I think they'll get more and more erratic and lash out as it manifests, as we're kind of seeing. No one gave a shit about crypto like 3-4 years ago, even though it was very clear. Like if you understood what was being built here, like we should give a shit about this. Like this is serious for what it means for the U.S. Now that like people who don't think about it very deeply are starting to see, oh wait, like this circumvents our systems. Sanctioning people is not the same thing anymore. Now they're starting to care. They're starting to care because they understand what it means for power. And yeah, I just think that's the right lens to view this on, like on a power ownership kind of framework. And that's why I think like warfare is the right way to kind of view, like, listen, when nations clash with each other, what strategies are dominant? How does it evolve? Well, you look to like war for that. You don't look to law for that. You don't look to legal precedent and, like I jokingly say, boobsy doobsy versus Kelvin Coolidge, well, how does this mean? How are they going to apply the Wooden Canoe Act of 1918 to stable coins? I don't think they did that right. Like, you're going to do it anyway. Like, it's all post hoc justification for what they want to do anyway. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, those laws could not exist. They're just going to make a new one that lets do that. Like, these are the entities that own the law, create the laws, and enforce the laws. The judiciary is relatively independent, but you're just going to shop around. You find a judge that agrees with you. So it's like, how independent is that? And that's why I'm just like, I just see it as completely futile. Like, and I see legal analysis, like whatever, like your one guy's opinion on what the legal interpretation of this is among like a million, and the states is ultimately what matters and what they're going to push forward. So like start to view this as like, listen, what's the response to that? And I think you draw from like how low intensity warfare responds to that, things like that. I don't know if I'm getting off topic from your original question.
No. It's you hit a lot of points, and I was just thinking it's funny hearing you say some of these examples out loud because it made me think of the one you gave with the cantaloupe a while back as well, like the melon or something like that. Just essentially trying to fit archaic rules to brand new technology that defies even the dimension within which they're thinking about it. But I mean, it all seems to kind of tie back to the origins of cryptocurrency, really, with the cypherpunks and the crypto anarchists and all these people saying essentially like, hey, you're never going to be able to, if it's a system to free the people against a system that benefits from controlling the people, you're never going to be able to convince them under the letter of their law to allow you to do it. And so cypherpunks write code, so they say, which again goes to the code is law, which defies the meat space conversation we had. But encryption can go a long way and can do quite a lot, and it's an asymmetric weapon of defense, I think, in many situations, where just having a seed phrase can defend against empires, essentially. So not trying to wax poetic here, but I think just in wrapping up the whole, like, how do people respond to certain things like this, like, I think, if you were to impose the Restrict Act right now and say anybody who transacts in cryptocurrency gets the death sentence, which honestly, if I saw that as a headline, I wouldn't know if it was real or not. With the people on crypto Twitter saying GM and chasing airdrops and all that stuff, which is cool and fun, nothing against it, right? But maybe they're not going to go to the grave for it. I don't think in that situation with the way things are today, people would take that risk. But I think if we go into not so difficult to imagine near distant dystopian future with a CBDC and social credit scores and the state interfering with all of your personal and private matters, then the scale is balanced out again, and maybe people are willing to take risks that they wouldn't have before with the way things are today. But that being said, I wanted to bring it back to so where are the opportunities, right? Because obviously this is a wide scale attack. It's not necessarily fun to be on the other side of, but we've all chosen to be here. Where do you think there are opportunities? What verticals are well positioned to benefit in many ways from this? I mean, one I can think of already is cloud servers and things like Urbit, which I've seen you write about before. But maybe talk a little bit about that. A lot of businesses and crypto products which probably really shouldn't even be around, might be crushed under the heel a bit. But what's going to lead to what technological developments as a reaction do you expect to see, and what might be well positioned as a vertical to benefit from all this chaos?
I cited a couple of those in the part 2 statement. Like Filecoin, Urbit, stuff like that. That again, these are things that either disintermediate centralized hubs of how things work. And again, like the internet and computers, where the internet was made the way it was for infrastructure reasons. Like, it wasn't nefarious, right? Like, but we needed Moldbook's like viewpoint on this is like, good about how the internet's like inherently flawed and how it's made because it's very centralized. But if you have, engaging on a peer-to-peer kind of way, which is what Urbit is, it's just a peer-to-peer server of me engaging with you, you engaging with me, in like a cryptographic style of way. Like, that's more of what the internet wanted to be, but the infrastructure wasn't there, and now that's a slow process of doing it. Filecoin is, what you could say what cloud providers do. I mean, it's in terms of storage of information, like website front ends, images, things like that. It points, instead of a DNS server pointing to a website, it points to a hash, and the hash is found in that network for how IPFS works. I don't know how much. I mean, right now that infrastructure is not ready for prime time. Like, we need cloud providers for a lot of this stuff, but that will obviously benefit and grow from there. So, I mean, I would absolutely be long-term bullish Filecoin, Urbit for sure. Which it's hard to capitalize on. And I guess you could buy some stars or planets to monetize that, but those are things that will definitely benefit from higher usage of it. It just needs to be, the barriers to entry and usage of it need to be lower and more accessible, and it needs to be able to support real interactions and what have you. But Arweave. Is it Arweave? No, it's not Arweave. Arweave is like what Filecoin is. There's another one that does GPU rendering. I cited it, Render. I cited it in my thread too, which is like socialized like GPU usage. So stuff like that, things that try to on-chainify or cryptoify like infrastructure that is deeply centralized now and dispersing it to make it more robust. Those will be inherently more and more critical, because like another thing I write about in Predict 2, like the targeting VPN usage already. They're going to go next to VPN servers. And then I think a real low hanging fruit is cloud providers. Like if you threaten Azure and say, hey, if you're anything related to DeFi could be OFAC related and we're going to look at you like, they don't care. Like, they're going to get rid of you. Like they have no ideological marriage to us at all. Like we're just a revenue line item for them, and understandably so. Whatever, their business. They're not going to take that risk. We shouldn't expect them to AWS to stand up for us and try to continue to host things that are crypto related. And in a way, it's kind of good because we shouldn't be reliant on them anyway. That's not what this is, and we want to piecemeal start moving away from that as it is. But it's a process, and that's the thing when I wrote up with the decentralization system. It's not reasonable to expect new projects right at the genesis to be fully decentralized. Like things need to be built, coordinated, and have you, and then that gets incrementally more and more, decentralized. And yeah, so it's going to move that way with infrastructure. I can't think of other infrastructure examples off the top of my head, but like, compute, storage of anything, communication fundamentally. Urbit is basically the communication pillar of that. You can't stop that. Like you can stop it if you shut down the internet in a region and make buying computers like something you have to register like you do a gun. Like that's what you need to do to stop that, right? Like, okay, if you want to stop that, then it's really mask off. And I don't think they can do that without showing their hand. So for that reason, you can exist kind of as a guerrilla, as a Vietnam farmer in the US probably, but you're gonna have to exist understanding like, hey, I'm in a gray area and these people don't like that I'm doing this. Anyway, those are the things that'll benefit. Also just decentralized services and infrastructure in general. I'm a hyper bullet on ETH, which is an easy thing to say, but like this is a direct benefit of that. And decentralized exchanges, transactions, anything that has to do with that. Like even like NFTs, insofar as they're actually being used, not monkey pictures. Like NFTs are real technology. Like, codifying ownership on chain in a way that everybody can see and that's transparent. Ownership in anything in that way, ownership of artwork in that way. So, I mean, I'm long-term bullish all that stuff because I think it represents like decentralizing and putting the ownership out of reach of people who can arbitrarily seize your assets. Anything that fits that description, I'm bullish on. It's just who does it best, who finds the product market fit and gets the network effects, etc.
Those are the hidden gems of this episode. But no, in all seriousness, I mean, one I'd add to that list as well is privacy tech, right? I think it's going to be high on the list of targets to go after within this whole crackdown of anything that helps the individual be sovereign. But at the same time, I think that'll again kind of coincide with the thesis of, well, the more people need it, the harder they go after it, and the more people need it. In the sense that right now with transparent blockchains, like I recently wrote a piece or a short blog post on Railgun, right, which is just a protocol that can be put on top of any transparent blockchain, L1, L2, and essentially inherit all of the properties of that blockchain and encrypt all of the transactions and keep them private, not just at rest, but at all times, right? So it's not even to show that particular product because I know there's many others that are trying to do things like that. And then there's, of course, also like privacy coins that are built into the base layer, like Zcash and Monero and all those sorts of things.
Oh, yeah, Monero. Yeah. That's an omission on my part. I agree with you totally on privacy tech, yeah.
Monero. And what I mean by that is, like it may have been that up until the recent past, the only people who cared about Monero were privacy advocates and activists and cypherpunks and a very like niche, long tail end of the population. But I think now, as it's becoming clear that the attack surface is greater, and you even see these things about like how you could just feed a UTXO into some sort of AI plugin, and it can trace it all the way back to the sex, and then give you the identity and the home address of the person who first purchased it, right? Like that really, as Zuko, the founder of Zcash, wrote in a Twitter post at some point, that really kind of eliminates a lot of the asymmetry you have using cryptography as a defense mechanism, right? If it's fully transparent, easy to trace back to, okay, if you want to take Bob's wealth, all you got to do is find him at 204 Oak Ave, right? And he's going to be there at noon. That opens people up not just to state attacks and countries that are more hostile and more authoritarian, but also to malevolent actors and other criminals who might want to take advantage of of that transparency. And that's why I'm so vehemently opposed to things like KYC, which I understand that everyone's accepted just as like a necessary evil, so to speak. But I think the implications and the second order effects of its externalities are going to become more apparent now as people realize really what it is that they're giving away in these honeypots of information. So going back to the thesis, that's when privacy tech, privacy coins are going to play a role in helping people stay safe, right? And helping people retain their sovereignty, their digital autonomy. And at the end of the day, like privacy is one of the things I'm very focused on. I like to write a lot about it because it changes the psyche, right? Like you and I might be comfortable discussing things that are not PC or not necessarily, societally accepted by the regime at this point in time. But other people might censor themselves to the extent where it gets darker and darker. And as a matter of fact, like a tech journalist called Naomi Rockwell retweeted a quote from one of my essays earlier today, and somebody else answered saying,
Nice.
Hey, it was a big win. But somebody else answered saying, what this guy is saying, it's along the lines of what he's saying is accurate. I lived in Poland before the fall of the wall, and it's true that we would self-censor basically anywhere we were, except for like with close friends or family at home, and that's because you could close the door. But now, with technology being everywhere and surveillance tech being so widespread and pervasive, you got to kind of self-censor at all points in time if you want to be compliant and if you don't want to become a target down the road. Because, like, as I always say, it's like you might think that nothing you say is controversial. In other words, you have no opinions of your own. But what is to say that in 5 years, whoever's in power doesn't view them as controversial, and now there's a digital trail of those. And it's easy to say kind of like let's enhance executive powers. Let's do this. Let's do that. When it's your team that has the ball. But when it's the other team, it becomes a lot less fun. And I think that's where tech comes into play. And it's like, yeah, some things can be fixed through paperwork and lobbying and legislation, and some other things should just be, protected as human rights that are immutable, and the technology can help us in that. But so anyway, to wrap up this rant, I think one last thing I'd like to touch on, because what kind of podcast would it be if we didn't, is how does AI fit into this societal shift that we're seeing? There's a lot of hysteria around it, right? A lot of, okay, this is going to end the world now. Some actually kind of hilarious takes about it that I've read in various places. But what is your perspective on how does this tie into either freeing the individual or restraining the individual? And what should we be doing about it?
Yeah. By the way, I don't have any cutoff or anything, so
Okay,
no sensitivities at time.
cool.
AI. I mean, I'm. It's funny. I'm bullish AI, but I've actually posted some things, and I'm kind of known internally at Rabbit for like not being anti AI. I mean, I'm not anti AI. I use ChatGPT, and I've used Midjourney. Frankly, recently I'm getting better at it. Love amazing tools. But it's a massive productivity enhancer, obviously. And initially that will cause increased demand for certain things, like getting an attorney will be cheaper because it will bring down the need of litigation, and knowing all attorneys do are they just know things and articulate it. Like that's it. Like it's gonna be a really hard time for professions that are trash. This is kind of derogatory, but I mean it's just kind of what it is. If your profession is fundamentally like being a trash bag of facts, like you're in trouble. Like if you just regurgitate information you've retained from school and you don't synthesize anything, you're listen. Like honestly, you're in trouble. Like pharmacists are probably a good example. Like doctors actually probably in general are a really good example. Not surgeons clearly, and things that operate the people who operate in physical space. There's a name for this paradox. Where AI struggles with the inverse of what humans do. So like physical space stuff that we think is fucking easy, that is hard, apparently, to get a computer to recognize, move, and navigate effectively. Whereas like the doctor's role or like the pharmacist's role, that's just information. Like they crush us at that. So like if your profession is not synthesizing information in a unique way, or if you're not good at doing that, like you're going to have a hard time. Like it's going to disintermediate. It's going to replace that because, um, but I also think the content it generates and like the writing it does and the stories it will produce are kind of going to be inherently mediocre, because that's kind of what it's trained on. Like most writing and information is middle distro mediocre, and I can't like the unique ones are going to really unique value add type people are going to who have like a voice that is noticeable are going to shine. Um, and that's something I've actually written on in one of my threads. AI is artificial abundance, crypto is artificial scarcity. AI will saturate us in a deluge of content and information and creations. And hey, look, everyone's a graphic designer now, right? Everyone can write a Twitter thread by just telling the AI to write me a Twitter thread, right? Like, so everyone can now produce at a superhero tier output level, but that doesn't mean the quality is that. The quality, definitionally, it's like like everyone else. The analogy I use in like the thread was like, listen, if you put everybody standing on a 6 foot on a 6 inch tall block, everyone's 6 inches taller. Like the block is not a competitive advantage anymore, right? So everyone with ChatGPT is not some gifted creative person now. Like everyone has the tool. So right, it's like if you give every athlete steroids. I analogize this in there too. Like, listen, like everyone will get more athletic, everyone will get faster, stronger, all that. But Tom Brady's still Tom Brady because he's going to take it too, and you can't juice your way to Tom Brady's brain. You can't juice your way to Steve Nash's court vision. No matter what you take, you will never shoot like Steph Curry. So like those unique abilities, doesn't matter how much performance enhancing substance you give them, the cream of the crop still rises. Like there's just the thing is though, it's gonna hyper amplify those power laws of the elite and the best being like really fucking the elite and the best. And I even think like, the only sort of elite and best even get drawn out a little bit more. Like it's gonna really amplify power laws of like who's the best, who's most noticeable. It'll saturate us in content. Crypto will help navigate that by, if I write something, I can cryptographically sign it as my own. So if you can know what's authentically me and what's someone saying, hey, I'm back the bunny and I wrote this and whatever. And you could train the AI on my writing style too, I bet, where it kind of sounds like me. But I can still sign it as my own. And you care that it's my own because you seem like I have a different output than most outputs. I'm just using myself as an example. So yeah, it plays a huge role. I think it has a very almost like yin yang Darwinian kind of element with crypto, and that this like viewed as like as again like an evolution of what we're creating, and almost as a quasi evolution in itself with like that'll follow biological rules in some way. I almost think these are competing elements for like homeostasis in a way. And that, yes, you're saturated with more things, and now you have a tool to limit those things and navigate it. So it's like they compete in like this very both like antagonistic and symbiotic way that I think is kind of almost poetic in its own right. And yeah, I guess that's how I see it playing out with crypto. I think I think there'll be a lot more crossovers in a way I can't even see or predict right now. But the content and information and stuff that AI generates, it'll be hard to navigate. You won't know if a deep fake is real or not. You won't know if certain things are authentic and by authentic, we mean we're human. So we value the human still, right? Like this is still viewed from an inherently, like a human oriented, like anthro related like mindset, right? Because ultimately we're still the people who give things value. We're going to value things made from humans still. Like the AI is not going to change that. We'll appreciate stuff that a computer makes, but I do think there will be elements of us wanting the person out of it and stuff like that. And crypto will be a big thing of having that stick out still, and the artificial scarcity that it gives to the financial world as well. Now, there's nothing stopped. There's no physics law stopping there from being 18 trillion Bitcoins. Like there's no reason for that not to be the case. Crypto constrains that. Like cryptography and the way things are programmed, creates an artificial scarcity that gives something value that lets us interact with it. So AI, artificial abundance and information, crypto, artificial scarcity, a very natural, poetic kind of evolution there. I think they'll be symbiotic in a lot of ways, and I'm excited for it. And I'm curious. I'm really excited to see the response to the, unremarkable white collar class that's going to have a hard time and then realize, wow, truck drivers are actually okay still. why I just got they want to cut my pay in half and they're reducing hiring. What happened? Like, the AI, if the AI can do it, you were kind of just a fact maker. Mostly. I'm being unfair there because some people are not just that. But it'll be a good heuristic for that. And I think it's going to upset a lot of the mid curve class. And I can see AI being something that's attacked a lot more too. Sorry, to circle back to your alignment point and people being kind of scaremongering about that. I think that's going to be latched onto really aggressively, even for people who are insincere about it, because they see what AI represents insofar as creative destruction, essentially. And yeah, the kind of the priest mentality that goes into the AGI conversation, and those people inherently are looking to the government to constrain what technology does, and they think the government will do the best job at that. I mean, they think a centralized like a government will also do that in a way that's that'll be fair and impartial and like what? Like I mean, that's like it's literally the last entity you should go for for the most important piece of technology to be guided and navigated with. It's like such inherently this control-based mindset of, I mean, it's the same thing you see with anything. There's an emergency, there's fear, capitalize on it, get more control by giving it to the government will seize more control on that because the people who are losing their shit want them to. And it's like the same cycle that you see with everything else. It's almost like kind of the same thing as COVID. Like Elijah Yudowski, Roku, they're basically little Tony Fauci's of AI. This is horrible. Flatten the curve. AGI is out of control. Wear your mask. Don't censor the chat GPT. It's the same kind of thing. There's always a little bit of truth in any of these claims. COVID was obviously destructive. Was it as destructive as those people made it out to be? Fucking no, right? Is AGI, I think it's these patterns are so obvious to me. I think it's very clear AGI will not be the doomsday scenario that it's being made out by a very actually small fringe, by the way. Like a lot of prominent people also don't think that in AI. Like Rune does not think that. A couple other guys, I can't think of their names. Beth Bezos, the EACC guy, I don't know if he doesn't seem to think that either. A lot of people don't think. A lot of people in the AI sphere also are not this level of fear. So it's not like it's consensus and clear and obvious.
Yeah.
I just see the same cycle of the same neurotic personality types being loud, getting a cohort of mid-curve type people who want control over things will attach themselves to that. They'll form a coalition and try to shut it down and get control of it in some way. That's just the pattern that's going to play out because that's a pattern that always plays out. So I don't think AI will be any different on that pattern.
I mean, yeah, you're telling me that an institution that still demands its customers, if you want to call us that, communicates with it via fax, shouldn't be in charge of regulating technology moving forward. And by that I mean the state. But what's interesting is that there are a lot of parallels. Like I see the AI and crypto world often butt heads. I'm not sure for what reason exactly. But the one commonality I see is that both are attacked on the grounds that, well, they're, like you said, digital abundance with AI and digital scarcity with crypto, but they're both deflationary in the sense that because they introduce so much efficiency to the market, they bring prices down. Crypto clearly disintermediates. I mean, it's removing the third party that processes as things go through it. And then AI, on the other hand, is disintermediating a lot of professions that used to be the only way you could get certain things done. And now it turns out that you don't have to outsource to a 15-person engineer team. You can just prompt chat GPT and you have whatever you want, right? And so I see it almost as kind of like a neo-Luddite response to these two ways of technology in a way that I'm not sure that we saw it even with the dot-com boom or anything like that, where it's just we have to stop it at all costs. Humans aren't going to have any jobs left. It's going to destroy us because of either, like doomsday Terminator type reasons, or we're all just going to starve to death as the AIs are overlords and use cryptocurrencies to control us. And so, it's a lot of hysteria that I'm not sure is well informed. It feels like a resistance to change that is obviously mainly sponsored by the state that does not want to be disintermediated and doesn't want to be made anything other than all powerful. But then a lot of people who seem to support that notion and want that to occur. And so that's where, going back to earlier in the conversation, I think that these nation states that don't have a lot to lose and have a lot to gain are going to come into the picture. And scoop up a lot of that talent, whether it's in crypto or AI or whatever else, and give them the opportunity to go be entrepreneurs there, thrive, and bring their economies all the opportunities that presents. While the U.S. is stuck as kind of like a dying empire with all things people don't want, and a lot of demand and very little supply for anything. So
a great example of that is the U.S. is the U.S. is one of 2 countries in the world. Really, it's the only country that taxes based off of citizenship, not location. Why does it do? No, it does it because you can get away with it. Like that's it. Like just remember, like companies will charge you what they can get away with, as they should, right? Everyone tries to maximize their own value. Like this is not some kind of insidious anti-corporate capitalist thing. Like it's a good thing. Like they should, and you should push back on that. And that's how the best kind of legal systems are antagonistic. He did the crime. He didn't give the crime. We give all our information, what have you. We come to there's usually gives the best output usually. And when you have 2 classes competing in their own self-interest or best interest, you usually get a reasonably okay outcome, and the US has been so overwhelmingly like, the 8,000-pound gorilla of everything that it flexes, and it can flex. And again, we should expect it to flex because it can. Any other power would do that. It's not unique to the United States. That's the thing that I don't like to malign things for like their essence. And I'm not going to malign a tiger for being violent. I'm not gonna it's to me it's like it's insulting something for the nature of what like being that thing is. You should always expect the lead superpower to act in the most profit extracting mafia style way it can, because that's how Darwinian game theory works at survival. I mean, I don't know how you want to phrase that. You should expect people to compete that way. And the US is just going to struggle with as it's not able to do that. And it's going to try to keep doing that.
You framed it. No, I was gonna say you framed it in a much nicer way than I would. I would call it a parasite being removed from its host, not wanting that to happen for obvious reasons. But I mean, I see both sides of the picture. I mean, it's self-sufficiency, it's survival, and at the end of the day, it's an entity, and that entity is composed of individuals, and those individuals don't want to lose control. So. Who would, right? So, like, I get it. Doesn't mean I respect it, but I get it.
No, totally. Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, one last thing I think I want to touch on here, and then it would probably make sense to wrap it up so that listeners don't fall asleep. But I mean, I hope they wouldn't, because I think it's been a great chat. But the great rebundling, right? So we've talked a lot about economic models, how things are shifting. We talked mainly about, crypto ethos and ideology, and a little bit about, of course, how like macroeconomics fits into that and how there might be power shifts. But when it comes to business models themselves, and I mean we touched on this a little bit, technology being deflationary, such as AI. Like, tell us a little bit about the great rebundling thesis that you wrote about.
Yeah. And technology is just like inexorably disinflationary, no, deflationary, not even disinflationary. And that's part of why I like this. And it makes people more productive, it makes stuff just cheaper in general. But yeah, on the rebundling point, I don't know if there's like any like investing takeaway there. That was just something I was just thinking on for a while, on like the cycles of how tech companies work. And like a lot of business models are just bundling up a bunch of services and reintroducing it, and then another entity comes around and unbundles those and provides just that service. And there's usually something about like how supply chains or unit economics work, to where if I silo just that service, it's more profitable for me to do so, and so now I do it, and the market responds favorably to that, and then eventually apparently rebundling them makes sense. It's a curious cycle. Like the thread goes into it more with a lot more examples. Amazon is the unbundling of stores into like individual items you search for. You don't have to go into a store. Unity unbundles like what Activision does, where you just make the game, but you don't have distribution aligned with it. Google is a bundling of God knows how many services. Now you're seeing Google get unbundled with like what ChatGPT does, where it's like search and then some in a very narrow way. So yeah, I was just looking at what communication was, and like I forget if I heard this or this is my own thought. Or it's like, no, I think this is my own thought. Where like communication naturally, like between just you and I, if we were in person, is just, it's ephemeral, it's disappearing, it's completely secure. Like it's like super based, like no one private, all that by its nature. And as you keep adding ways to amplify communication or give it more permanence, you lose privacy. You lose like that security in some way. And like examples I gave was like smoke signals. As you send out more of a signal for people to see it, everyone else can see it though, so you lose privacy. Um, the the internet is a great example of that, because as you, or like writing a message, it's still private, but the permanence lets other people see it if it goes beyond just one thing. So like even stuff that doesn't look like technology erodes a bit of the privacy of it in some way by giving it permanence or more scale, more people to see it or to stick around more. The internet's like the crescendo of that, where it's there for everybody. You're like not secure at all. Every company can basically see it. It has permanence like no other. I know whatever you say sticks around forever. So it's like the antithesis of like hyper scaled, hyper available information, but like no privacy, like not as a structural thing. And crypto is like a dramatic, well, not dramatic because it's doing it incrementally, but is a way it's consistently starting to rebundle. So the theme with that is that privacy has been systematically unbundled from communication, because everything you add loses privacy in some way. And crypto is the systematic rebundling of privacy and communication. I treat financial transactions as communication too. That's a form of communicating to me. But even sending messages, and stuff like that. This goes beyond just crypto insofar as crypto, the financial realm, like PGP, right? Signing a message that only someone else can read with your key. That's cryptography. So when I say crypto, I mean cryptography, not just like
Yeah.
cryptocurrency finance. So like cryptography writ large is the rebundling of privacy and communication, and it's just kind of like a beautiful poetic thing to see. And like you have to scale out much further than like this bundling cycles you see with companies, but like I think the bundling thing follows patterns that go beyond just. I think it's a technological thing, not just a company thing. And so I abstract that onto technology in that way. And I was like, that I think that makes sense. Like view crypto as like a force for good in that way. You know, and I don't think many people do. And that's part of why the branding of cryptocurrency is like really nefarious in a way that we're not nefarious, like insidious. Like it's harmful in a way we don't appreciate, because it makes normies just see like they think money, like, oh, they're just making money. And I think people inherently know money doesn't actually have a reason to be valuable besides like the country you're in uses it. I think people kind of like innately understand that. And I think they abstract that onto crypto. When you use the word cryptocurrency, like, oh, well, this is just money with no state. This is silly. They see Doge and they don't see anything else. Um, so, like, yeah, cryptography is something that's rebundled a lot of core stuff into our communication and financial transactions that, I mean, I'm just like deeply grateful for that, this force has come around and is doing that. And kind of unfortunately, I think what possibly will be the unbundling of that will probably be quantum computing,
Oh god.
or AI.
Not yet. Not yet.
Like, because that'll probably, I mean, if quantum computing exists, I'm not an expert on that, but, if it theoretically exists the way they anticipate it to, like, I mean, cryptography is broken, then, right? Like, or maybe AI can do a soft breaking of it where it's not fully unbundled. I don't know. I'm not rooting for that, but viewing these cycles as cycles, like, it'll probably happen. So, anyway, yeah, that's the rebundling theory.
A lot of interesting points there. I mean, like for one, the cryptographic truth when signing something, right? Whether that's a message like me saying, "Hey, back the bunny, let's chat," or whether that's me making a payment to you, because financial transactions, like you said, are in a way communication. You're communicating what's valuable to you versus what's not. Cryptography is going to play a big role in that. But going back to the AI conversation and abundance and this proliferation of content and realities and parallel versions of truth, I think it's going to play an important role there as well. Like we're definitely in this kind of postmodernist weirdo time right now, or cycle of history where there is no ultimate truth. There's 10 parallel realities. Depends on which news station you tune into, where you get your propaganda from, all this stuff. And encryption and like the ultimate finality that it determines is going to be one of the few tools which you can use to actually determine, well, is this actually something that occurred within the reality that we can all agree on or not? So I think that'll be important. And you know, the thing I want to touch on with the great rebundling and unbundling is that I think we see both in crypto as well, because by its nature of being open source, or the majority of protocols at least, it becomes very easy to both rebundle in the sense of, for example, abstract away all the technical difficulties of a bunch of underlying protocols, put it in a nice wallet interface, and allow non-technical users to use it. But it's also very easy to kind of unbundle, if I'm using the term correctly, where you go and you say, okay, there may be a long tail niche which I can service, where I understand the users very well. Maybe they're sophisticated financial investors and they want to hedge against, I don't know, the interest rates on a stable coin that they've borrowed from a protocol. I can build something on top of that protocol very quickly, and not necessarily quickly, but seamlessly. I can attract that group of users and I can service them by building on top of the shoulders of these giants, versus having to go and build the borrowing and lending protocol myself from scratch, and then build that sort of niche long tail use case on top of it. Now I can just go and search out, okay, where has the market not fulfilled or satisfied the needs of all these people using all these different protocols? And there's where I see kind of the long tail being serviced in a way that I haven't seen necessarily in the SaaS industry, for example, where you have to have a minimum total addressable market for it to be something you really can take off the ground, because you're not going to start an e-commerce store where you have 10 users in total forever. But maybe with a long tail protocol where you have 10 high lifetime value users, and maybe 10 is an exaggeration of too low of a number, but you can make it work. You can have it, keep your day job, and you can do this at night, and you can do that incrementally over a variety of different services and projects in a way that wasn't possible before. So it's very interesting to see that, and all the different variations on the same sort of product that'll come out of it, I think.
Yeah. A good, I mean, people will, the privacy crypto gives you, not everyone cares, right? Like, not everyone really views it as an important thing, and that's fine. Like, it should be available to you, but if you want to trade off some of it, and it's always the security, convenience trade-off, basically. Like, that almost always exists. Like, that'll probably always exist in some way, where if you want to be more convenient, like the example you gave, you got to trade off a little security. Like, I need to give you some kind of key or something, who I am. Something needs to be given away to get that convenience. I don't think that'll ever change. I think that's like a law, like a one level, like a biological law or something. I just don't think I think that'll always be the case, and a lot of people sometimes don't care, and they'll give that away, and they'll get more services and what have you. So yeah, there'll be little, like, maybe micro unbundlings of crypto stuff. Like, I mean, right now, like, if you can trace me back to a central exchange, like, my privacy was sort of unbundled there, right? So, like, it's imperfect, and it's very much a process. Like, it's not fully there, but eventually I do think it gets fully there, where a parallel economy or a way to transact exists, where I don't care about your off ramp. I don't ever want to off ramp. If I want to get something from you, you give me your wallet and I pay you. And it's the same. I mean, that's like how Venmo works. When I Venmo you money, like, you're not getting anything in your hand. Like, I've transferred a ledger, on my account, and to a ledger in your account. The only thing is, the ledger exists at a company that can shut us both down if they don't like it. Like, you're okay with that as a concept, like, empirically. Like, it's all ledger movement. Like, this is the same ledger movement, just where no one else controls it except you and I, and we can do our thing however we want, and no one has to know that. So I don't think that you'll need to ever care about off ramping eventually, because people will understand, oh wait, this is ownership. Like, I have money, I have economic utility with this asset, and I don't ever need to move it around in a way that leaves on chain. Anyway, yeah. So it's an evolving, like, theory that's definitely not fully there yet, but we're beginning to see more and more things that will allow not perfect privacy, but maybe as perfect as we can hope it to be. And I just hope, quantum computing or AI doesn't fuck with it, but it probably will.
Our next podcast will have to be about how to create a parallel economy by forming tight-knit communities in the meat space. I think that'll be the title of it. So
yeah.
Anyway, man, awesome conversation. I've learned a lot from reading what you put out there. Where can people find more about you, what you're working on, what you're doing? in general. I mean, I'll drop your Twitter, your blog, the blog.rabbitx.io. Anything else that
Yeah.
people should check out?
Yeah. So, I mean, RabbitX is a decentralized perp exchange on Starknet, on Ethan Starknet. So, yeah, I mean, I have amazing team. Like, I'm just super grateful to be working with them and building what we're building. And to find more, to find out more about me and us in general, because I started this account to kind of as a quasi content marketing, you could say,
Yeah,
but really like me, blogging and talking about stuff and just putting thoughts out there, and then what we're building is consistent with that ethos. And you can find the RabbitX blog that's linked in the Twitter profile. Back the Bunny Twitter obviously is where we basically exist now, and then our Discord as well, which is also linked in the profile. And yeah, you can just interact, talk with me there. I love talking about anything related to this or crypto writ large. And yeah, maybe I'll expand that footprint later on, but right now that's basically it.
Well, and I also gotta say, I think it's such a clever way of doing guerrilla marketing, where a lot of brands might say, like, let's go to a podcaster or a writer and say sponsored by, and you're like, no, I'm just gonna build up my own audience and then drop something for my protocol. And I think it's great because it's not always just flaunting how great it is, which I'm sure it is, and I've heard a lot of good things about it. But because you're covering all these other topics, you draw in a wide audience, and then you introduce them to this in a way that it doesn't feel forced; it feels organic. Because at the end of the day, it is your voice, and it's great to hear that your team is also ideologically aligned with you, and that you are in crypto for the right reasons. I think that's something that more and more people are hopefully starting to wake up to and start to look at, is like, who's the team behind it? What are their intentions? Why are they here? How long are they going to be around for? So anyway, yeah, everybody, check out blog.rabbitx.io. Everything else you mentioned, I'll drop the links below as well. But this was a great first episode of the Sovereign Chimpanzee podcast. So really appreciate you coming on, man. And we'll have to do it again sometime soon.
Yeah, man, I'm really glad you reached out. And yeah, great conversation. Great talking with you. Everything I had hoped from like the Twitter presence. And yeah, really appreciate it, dude.
Awesome. We'll chat soon.